Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from, and thank you for listening to the Third Bridge podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Segovich, once again recording from our London office. Undoubtedly, you clicked that play button, or download or subscribe, because you wanted to hear great stories from the world's most innovative founders. And we've got those. But this podcast takes a unique approach to those stories, uncovering the human insights that helped launch a successful business or propel it to new levels of growth. In a world with infinite amounts of data at our fingertips, Third Bridge strongly believes that the knowledge locked up inside people's minds is the most critical information to generating a new idea or to have the confidence to move forward on a plan. That's true in the investment world, but we've also found it's true in the broader business world. So thank you for joining us as we discuss those great stories. And as always, keep sending in your feedback, your ideas to podcast@thirdbridge.com. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Third Bridge podcast, episode 4 with Christopher Ahlberg from Recorded Future. Recorded Future, very fascinating company. They are squarely in the threat intelligence / cybersecurity industry. And what Recorded Future does that is very interesting is in that predictive space. They are looking at threats that have not yet come to fruition. So you can understand why that would be very appealing to security officers in large organizations that may have their arms around existing threats, but the ability to have that intelligence to know where the next threat is coming from and how to react to that. Very valuable information. And that is why Recorded Future has recently attracted a $780 million acquisition by Insight Partners. So very big time. That's a huge launch pad for the next stage of growth for Recorded Future. And it speaks to the value proposition that Recorded Future offers. There's a few things that I want to point to in this conversation. One being the genesis of Recorded Future. Christopher tells a story that I think a lot of us can relate to about how he came up with the idea for Recorded Future. So listen out for that. The other thing I want to call attention to is how Christopher talks about the blend of human analysis and machine learning. Right? It's he very much live in the data space. Machine learning, AI, all of those buzzwords that you hear, but those are only as valuable as the humans that are able to analyze that data and understand what's a real threat, what's not a threat, what does it mean, how do we then analyze further data to get the perfect picture. So all of those things weigh into it, and that's a very important piece of this story. So listen out for those two things as well as the rest of the conversation. I think you'll find Christopher to be a really fascinating guest. I also want to mention that keep your comments and questions coming in at that email podcast@thirdbridge.com. We read all of those emails. We love hearing from our listeners, so keep those coming in. Otherwise, enjoy the conversation. Thank you for listening. Well, thanks again to our listeners for joining us today. We're very excited to have our guest. He's from a company called Recorded Future. They are in the ever-growing cybersecurity world, and they're doing some really innovative and creative things, which is partially why they just secured a very sizable and meaningful investment, which we'll have a chance to talk about on the podcast. Very excited to have Christopher Ahlberg joining us. Christopher, how are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. No worries. Yeah, well, we typically like to start these conversations with a little bit of our guest's background. So why don't you let our listeners know a little bit about yourself? Where were you born? Where do you live now? Where did you go to school? All those kind of fun things.
Sure. Yeah, no. So I was born originally in Sweden back many years ago. I grew up there, went to high school, all that. After a brief stint as an Army Ranger, I ended up in engineering school, did my master's and my PhD in computer science. Was very lucky to sort of fall into a very good strand of thought there, working on how to visualize large databases. This was sort of before people got into thinking about analytics and big data and AI and ML and all these wonderful words that people put people put on it now. So we built this one company, Spotfire, out of that. And then eventually I ended up in the US back in 96 97 sort of a thing. So 23 years later, still live there.
So tell me a little bit on Spotfire, just so our listeners can kind of form a more clear picture. What did Spotfire do, and when did you start that, and when did you exit the business?
So that came out of research, again, that I did for my PhD on how to, again, visualize large databases. Think about dealing with data sets like very large compound libraries that somebody might have at a biotech or a pharmaceutical company, trying to help people with big databases of oil fields and potential oil fields, and helping people drill for oil in good places if you want. We worked a lot with hedge funds, trying to look at the large data sets that would sort of occur in that world, whether that was for attribution analysis or stock picking or commodity pricing, all kinds of wonderful stuff. We did a lot of work in intelligence, which will probably be the bridge into Recorded Future here, dealing with, basically chasing bad guys of various sorts. And we built that company to a pretty nice, sizable business, and we sold it back in 2007 to TIBCO out in Palo Alto, and I stayed on for a couple of years and left that in 2009.
Great. Well, yeah, it sounds like that really gave you a lot of insights into your current business, which is Recorded Future. So you have a very interesting story about how you came up with the idea for Recorded Future, and I know it involved a little bit of working out physically as well as mentally to come up to that answer.
I do like physical workout. I'm a big fan of push-ups, if nothing else. But this time I was on the treadmill. This was literally in the middle of selling Spotfire, on the treadmill, sort of thinking about all kinds of stuff. It's hard to stop thinking. And this basically sort of the idea that, look, the web is becoming this wonderful place in the world where, the amount of information flowing to it is sort of surpasses any other concentration of information that has ever happened in the history of mankind. You sort of compare it to when building the Library of Alexander or something, but the web obviously is at a whole different level. And what's pretty cool about it is that it's all accessible from your computer, so that's pretty neat. Now the downside is that it's very unstructured, so it's sort of literally, as I was sort of running there and thinking about it, I was like, it's unstructured, but what can we do with this? And so this idea struck me that, what about if we could actually structure the web for analysis and be able to pick up things like Xi Jinping is traveling to Moscow next Friday, or Merck is going to open up a new factory in Malaysia early next month, and organize everything that humanity knew about the future and really do this. So, some version of that thought hit me. I ran into the kitchen, left the treadmill, and just started jotting down the sort of the basic underpinning of this idea, and more or less called up my patent attorney and just said, file it, and yeah, off to the races. Now, then, to be honest, it sort of sat for a couple of years, just waiting for it to be ready to go to work, but it's still pretty good start.
Yeah. So what year did Recorded Future officially open for business?
I think we registered the company something in like 2009. To be honest, we really didn't get started until early 2010. Okay. We raised the first money in 2009, but it sort of with some oomph to it, I would say early 2010. And originally we had Google and In-Q-Tel, two pretty decent names as investors, came on board, and early on, we did most of our work was sort of geared at what we call government work, and did that, and which was a great place to get started, and built out the technology, and then eventually figured out this application in cybersecurity.
That's so interesting. I'm really curious because obviously Recorded Future is your second company after a successful first company. In the early days of Recorded Future, can you recall, were there specific lessons that you had learned from launching a startup, earlier in your career that helped you in the early days? I mean, I know no startup is ever comfortable, right? I think we've talked about that when we were discussing this interview before jumping on live. But were there things that you learned from that first business that helped you in the early days, or at least maybe gave you more comfort?
I think, it's interesting because there is something, of course, that, people the outside tends to judge you as, oh, this guy knows how to do it. And accordingly, it will be easier to raise money or hire people and all this sort of stuff. Which is probably a reasonable sort of conclusion for people to draw. But, we went from, there's so many things that was radically different. We both, businesses were at a very sort of abstract level about analyzing data. So that's sort of good, and you sort of learn a lot about that. On the other hand, I'll say that we went from being sort of an on-premise software to something that's much more akin to call it a SaaS business, or maybe even a data business a la Bloomberg. We went from selling to certain segments to selling to another market. We went to so as much as there was many things that you'd think would be like, oh yeah, I don't know, we know how to do it and just run with it. Man, there was a lot of things to be unlearned, changed, and so you win some, lose some. I think we had to sort of figure out a lot of different things, and it was not until we found our product market fit in this cyber threat intel space that we started getting really comfortable, to use that word, because to be honest, between 2010 and 2012, before we found that, there was a lot of discomfort, and that's sort of just part of it, I think.
Yeah. When you had those, you mentioned when you launched Recorded Future that you had some initial investment into the business. How did those conversations, not necessarily specifics, but what was the reception from potential investors when you were, kind of giving them the synopsis for what Recorded Future was trying to achieve?
Yeah, no, so it's a long time ago, but 2010, 2009 probably, speaking with Google, I was very lucky running into these guys, Rich Miner and Bill Morris, incredibly visionary guys, very, very smart. Rich Miner, who very kindly, was on the board for 10 years after that, and an incredible entrepreneur himself, really just at a whole different level. And I think he sort of saw that there was an opportunity to build something big here, and he understood that, look, it may not be exactly what they're thinking about this second, but he saw enough of juice in the idea, and then, thinking that over time, that can be something very good. With In-Q-Tel, given their focus on intelligence, then I think it was pretty clear that they realized that we knew how to deal with intelligence problems from before, and we were on to something that had a very strong sort of potential application in their domain.
Right.
And we had backing from people who sort of intellectual backing, if you want, by people who are like, we need this. And so with those two, they came at it from different angles, but, largely basically saying, look, the internet is an incredible space for gaining information insights, and let's take advantage of that. That was a good starting point. And to be honest, you could probably still start businesses based on that.
Yeah. Similarly, I'm curious when you first started having conversations with prospects, and I'm sure you have a pretty robust client list now, but early days when you were having those conversations, because it seems to me, and maybe that's not the case, but it seems to me when you guys launched that it was a very innovative way of looking at threats, in terms of being more proactive and anticipating threats rather than reacting to what was already infected your company servers or or vulnerabilities that existed. So how did those conversations go when you were talking early with potential clients and saying, look, there's a need for this and we think we could be a valuable solution provider for it?
That's a great question. So dealing with the government in the very early days, which was sort of our initial focus, there, the sort of the premise of what we're doing, people probably would have referred to that as sort of open source intelligence, OSINT. That was not something we really had to argue with. People realized that that was very valuable. There were things happening into that with social media and so on that was sort of generating a lot of interest in it, sort of extra or, just even more interest in that. So that was sort of an easy conversation. Now, it was not necessarily 2010, 2011, 2012 was not an easy time to deal with the government, in particular in the U.S., because of, financial, the whole sort of financial crisis just put a lot of things in a tough spot. When we started dealing with this in the commercial world, to your point, on the threat intel side of things, getting out ahead of threats was something new. There were people who were doing that, so the big banks, for example, and maybe a few other segments, they had realized that, look, one cannot just wait to be attacked. You sort of have to go figure out things ahead of the curve. And that turned out to be a good thought for the big guys. And then we've been lucky, sort of as for every year that has passed by, the adoption of this has just gotten wider and wider and wider. And, now, it's not just the big banks, it's the long tail of credit unions and hedge funds in financials, for example, that are adopting this in a very wide way. And that's just been an incredible ride.
It's so interesting how that area has grown. What is the competitive landscape for you guys now? Are there other competitors out there that are doing what you do, or do you kind of consider yourself to be above and beyond some of the other companies out there that might be trying to do what you guys do?
So the competitive landscape is very interesting in this market. There's, you can count. So we're essentially dealing with an information problem, trying to have the best insights. And much like financial markets, I know a lot of people here might sort of be into financial markets. There's always somebody who knows something clever. So, if in the financial markets, if you're into commodity trading coming out of Zambia, there's going to be a guy who knows everything about coming out of Zambia in a clever way. And likewise, in intelligence, and specifically to cyber, there's always going to be people who have very particular insights, very specific, data points, and that can be quite valuable. So somebody counted actually that there's 140 companies in our space, probably a stretch, but that can be true. And there's a bunch of companies in our space. Now we've surpassed them. We've sort of built, our, product both more widely, sort of covering more types of information, and also having probably at least 2x more customers than anybody else in the space, and maybe 3 times more revenue. So that sort of in itself has been good. But it's a very interesting space because you're both competing with these other companies, but you're also competing with the bad guys who are, trying to stay away from the nets that you're sort of throwing to catch them. So you sort of got to be very good about A, staying in your A game versus the competitors, but B, versus the bad guys. And then, as you get bigger, the third thing that happens is that as you go grab for dollars, there's companies who are both our partners, but we also got to make sure that we get the dollars that otherwise might go to them. So you have to sort of play with the big guys and make sure that enough money gets allocated to your way, because we don't really need to argue with our clients anymore that they need to do intelligence. Everybody wants to do an intelligence-led security program. That's sort of done, but we got to make sure that the money gets allocated to this first versus something else. So it's complex, but it's fun.
I'm so intrigued about how you look at, and I guess it makes sense for the threat intelligence world, that you look at the the bad guys that are trying to cause damage to companies for their own gain. You consider them to be among the competitive set, and I guess that makes sense. I'm curious, and I want to go a little bit into your background, because something you touched on at the beginning of the conversation was You briefly mentioned that you had a stint with the Army Rangers, and you often I've read compare the future of threat intelligence to battle strategy, where threats are best handled through intelligence and anticipating threats. How much of your background in military kind of gave you that idea or that thought process? I'm just curious if there's a connection there.
Maybe. Probably not of substance. That's probably more about learning stamina and stay awake when you get really tired and you need to push through.
Yeah.
Probably more of that. But I do think in general, we're sort of an interesting impasse in all of this, that I like to make this point that much of what's going on in cyber is about espionage and crime. So steal money, steal secrets, which as you realize is sort of about espionage and crime. But there are things happening, there are conflicts in the world that are currently at the stage of espionage, but that are slowly walking towards, where unfortunately they might become into the physical world, where you think more about things like warfare. So that analogy shouldn't be used comprehensively, but should be used specifically when it goes there. But unfortunately, we might be seeing things, whether it's in Ukraine or Iran and a few other places, where we're getting closer to something that might be in that vernacular.
I definitely, and I mentioned at the beginning we would spend some time on this, and I think it bears discussion because it's such a meaningful milestone for your company. You've recently secured a fairly big investment, and I was hoping you could talk us through that, the amount that you guys have secured, what your plans are for the business moving forward. It's obviously a nice launch pad to the next phase. So, Christopher, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you build one of these startups, when you take on board external investors, and in particular, fancy external investors, you typically sort of get into this mode of like grow fast and add on all kinds of pieces to the business, and you tend to sort of think about when you're going to raise your next money and these sort of things. We've had a somewhat conservative sort of approach at Recorded Future up until here in May, which we'll come to the deal that we did with Insight. We had raised about, I think we list on Crunchbase, 56 million, something like that. At the time of the deal with Insight, we probably had spent about half of that. So, in this world where people spend $100 million by breakfast, we're probably pretty conservative. We're pretty proud to say we've always been, let's try to build a real business. Insight Ventures had invested in the company in October of 17. They liked a lot what they saw in the business, and here in the spring we had a lot of interest in the company from both strategic companies as well as other, call them private equity firms, that was sort of circling around here. And Insight then said, look, we'd like to just buy out the other investors and take things to the next level. And we ended up doing that. Worked out to be a pretty terrific deal. They did this bought the company at $780 million transaction. Worked out great. A few of us rolled a little bit of our holdings, but it sort of worked out in a just a terrific way. And now we're very well set up here to take the company to the next level, build it towards being able to be a public company, and just make sure that what we're doing in threat intel in itself, both as a space as well as we as a company, can be very, very strong and build something for the years to come.
So it sounds like you long term might be interested in an IPO. Is that the case?
Yeah, no, I think, look, we think that there is a great opportunity to build a strong long-term company here, not just something that we sort of fly by night. There's a lot of companies that get started in the quote unquote venture world that it's sort of set up to be a short-term bet. It's like, look, somebody have a 4 or 5 year window to things, sometimes even shorter, sometimes a bit longer. But and we think we've sort of learned here over time that there is an opportunity here to build something significant, something that can be strong and big. And I think what you have to think about as an entrepreneur is that as soon as you've raised money, you've sort of seen that it's not your own business, it's not the family business, but you have external investors through the door. You actually have to pretty much start building the company towards be able to be a public company. That's how we tend to think about it. We want to have a lot of optionality, so we're building the company in such a way that it can be a public company, and then we'll see what happens. We're still years from being able to be there. We think these days people want to see pretty sizable businesses to go public. So we have some work to do along that way, and when that happens, whether we take the company public or somebody comes along and buys it for $5 billion, we'll see. But I think we will have a chance to get to a tremendous outcome either way.
That's great. That's really exciting for your business. Congratulations on that. I know it's just a.
Oh, thank you.
I know it's not a final thing. It's a it makes you want to work harder. But that's a great problem to have for sure. So.
Absolutely.
One thing I wanted to mention. So when you and I were chatting before this podcast last week, you mentioned something that stuck with me, and I actually really liked what you said, and it was something along, I'm not going to say it perfectly Christopher Ahlberg style, but you said uncertainty opens the door of opportunity for an information solution. And I thought that was really powerful. I think, when you take a step back, it sort of has, it makes sense, right? But that obviously that fear, that discomfort of uncertainty when you're a business person or an individual, like you said, it opens the door of opportunity for an information solution. So how much of the conversations you have with clients and prospects is, that you guys are providing a solution that sort of gets in front of that fear a little bit, that discomfort? I think that's a very powerful sales message.
No, you're completely right. It sort of depends who you're talking to, of course, and certain people want to hear, certain people love that sort of reasoning, and then there are some others who are very practical and they just want to hear, give me something I can plug in and it improves my whatever by tomorrow, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with somebody who's taking a step back a little bit, I love having that conversation and really put it sort of not just to think about cybersecurity, but you just think about, call them markets or segments where you have a lot of uncertainty, and certainly financial markets come to mind, given the sort of what we're seeing there. But there are many segments where there's uncertainty. You mentioned warfare before, it's certainly one of them, and there's a reason that countries have typically 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever. In the U.S., we probably have 17 intelligence agencies. So when there is that sort of uncertainty out there, people try to mitigate that uncertainty by A, collecting information, getting to really good sources, which could be all kinds of sources, and B, being able to take advantage of that information, which typically involves processing it in smart ways, analyzing it, and figuring out how you put it to work. So, and I think, it's interesting, among investors, there are certain types of people who love information businesses.
Yeah.
There are other people you go meet, and over the years, I've met one or two of these type of investors. There's others who are like, information businesses. Sounds very boring. So, it sort of depends. We were lucky with the set of investors that came into Record Future sort of had a mindset that they thought information businesses were great. And I think it's true. If you were able to stick together the right set of information with the right set of analytics and the right ways of putting it to work, making it actionable, as people like to call it, operationalizing things, it can be very powerful. You can end up with it becomes a subscription business. It very naturally becomes a sort of a long-term business that you can get good lock-in effects on. And there are a lot of goodness that can come from that.
I mean, it's really exciting, and obviously it has, from ThirdBridge's perspective, it has some parallels to our business model, right? That we're helping
Absolutely.
on the
Yeah.
investment side, we're helping investors sort of overcome that uncertainty and feel more confident about their investment choices. It obviously
I think it's
resonates with.
very similar. I think it's, it's just different types of information and different, but you're right. It's very similar.
Yeah, no, it points to the whole concept of human insights and data insights and all those things that go into the process. But I'm curious. We've obviously talked on some great positives and opportunities for the business. But any great entrepreneur like yourself is always kind of looking at challenges. So I'm curious, what challenges for the business, what barriers to growth do you think there are in the next year, 5 years, 10 years that you're going to have to overcome?
Good question. So I think, first of all, there's sort of, and this goes to all of us, not just in our segment or in cybersecurity or beyond, just in general. We've sort of lived in an economic upcycle here that, you could argue whether that started in 2007 or 2008, but, since some low point there, things have been pretty much stamped up for the last, 11, 12 years. I think I just read that it's the longest up market, or whatever you want to call it, forever. So obviously that won't happen or continue forever. So, whether we have a short recession or a big one, I don't know. I don't know anything, but I know that it's not going to just be this sort of easy street in front of us forever. So you've got to sort of get ready for that. B, in our world, as I mentioned before, competition is plentiful. So we tend to think about not so much whether the companies are sort of in the same size order of magnitude as us, but you always have to be worried about that clever Israeli or Silicon Valley startup that is going to come up with some other angle on threat intel that is just going to outsmart us. So look, be paranoid about that. We don't see it now, but we'll just sort of continue to be high degrees of paranoia on that. You've got to think about the bad guys. The bad guys might come up with completely new approaches, new methods, new something that's going to make us look stupid, and that literally could happen. That's happened before. So not necessarily in our sort of would we been up to, but continuously just be strong about that. There is those are probably then there's just this continue to be able to build a business. So we're getting to that $100 million realm of things. We'll just call it that. Fuzzy enough, but that's one level as a business. It's pretty tremendous. Having been at 10, 100 is obviously fantastic, but we now have to think about becoming a $250 million business, or maybe even about becoming a $500 million business. So that means that you have to start thinking about everything from internal processes, and you need to go hire suddenly 400 people. That's just not, when you need to hire 4 people, you can sort of think about your friends and call Bob, who knows Sally, who tells you that Sarah is a great person, let's hire Sarah. But we need to hire 400 people, and it becomes a little bit different. So there are plenty of challenges in front of us.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've given quite a lot of thought to that, which is I'm sure exciting, but a bit daunting too. But definitely,
Sure.
I'm sure motivates your team. I would be my listeners would be very upset with me if I didn't actually do this, and I apologize before that I didn't ask. But really quick, are there things that you are seeing in the industry that you're keeping an eye on that you think are particularly that could be impactful in the next year or next 5 years? Whether that's new types of threats or new types of solutions. Is there anything that you have that's kind of insightful in that realm to impart?
I think maybe and this is not something that you need to be worried about like next minute, but the willingness to use destruction of systems. We've seen it sort of at one end with ransomware and those sort of things, where it's been hitting cities around the U.S. and so the bad guys always think about like where they can make money the easiest, or where they can sort of do what they can or what they want in the most easy way. So we've seen this sort of willingness to apply destruction, and that, again, can be ransomware, or it can be, we saw that recently by, the U.S. announcing that they attacked sort of Iranian systems with, by destroying them, frankly. Very hard to know as an outsider, but we sort of observed that, or when you see what the Russians have done in Ukraine and so on and so forth. So this idea of being willing to destroy things, not just steal information, steal money or what have you. I think that's sort of the one trend. And if I was somebody whose business sort of depended on these sort of computer systems, which, if I'm a hedge fund, a bank, whatever, obviously that's the case, I would be running scenarios up, down, left, right to make sure that I can get my business back online after somebody, frankly, just comes in and destroys it with a sledgehammer, a virtual one. That's one. I think I would double down the paranoia on this people stealing everything that you have and making it public, just really thinking about the sort of the inner secrets that would make you extremely uncomfortable if they're on Wall Street Journal. People are going to be willing to do this sort of stuff and put it in places that you do not like. I think we're going to see some very uncomfortable stuff there. No, I could sort of go on and on, but the next 10 years, they're not going to get comfortable here. It's going to be pretty bad. So, and I'm not saying this just to sort of because it's good for our business, because unfortunately maybe it is, but I would be very paranoid and just making sure that my systems are, offline as much as possible in this online world for the stuff that really matters, and B, make sure that I can get it up and running again if it's somebody's run around with a virtual sledgehammer.
Yeah. No, it is a very scary world online. Obviously loads of opportunity, and it's created a lot of opportunity for business growth, but it's also, like you said, created opportunities for the bad guys too. So we've talked pretty in depth about the business, and one of the things that we also like to do on these podcasts is have a little bit of fun with our guests. And we have a word association game. We call it Word Bridge, as a kind of fun play off of Third Bridge. And so what I'm going to do, Christopher, is I'll throw out a word or a phrase, and you come back with a word or a short phrase that you immediately think of when I say that to you.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's start with data.
Insight.
Okay. Internet.
Fast.
Fake news.
Disinformation. I don't know. Fake news. It's much harder than people think.
Yeah.
To deal with.
Silicon Valley.
Sometimes overrated.
Hack.
Hacks are plentiful.
Yeah. AI.
Overrated.
Yes. we love to hear that in Third Bridge too. It's not the silver bullet that some people think it is.
Not at all.
All right. Vacation.
No, it's great.
Yeah. Hobby.
Cooking.
All right. Is that your hobby?
Absolutely.
Okay. Any specialties in terms of cuisines or dishes that you're really good at?
No, in the summer, I actually grow my own vegetables pretty meticulously, and I love cooking with my own vegetables.
Oh, wow. That's great. Yeah. So is there a dish that you particularly like to cook from your fresh vegetables?
This summer, I succeeded pretty well with my fennel, which is I think about somewhat up there in the when you can succeed with your fennel, you're making it as a farmer.
Yeah.
So I made this fennel salad, which is just very simple, cut up early growth fennel with lime and lemon on. With lemon and olive oil and salt on. It comes out pretty well. So.
Wow.
Very simple.
It sounds delicious. My mouth is definitely watering over here. So the other thing that we like to ask, just to give a sort of an insight into your kind of your day. What's the first thing that you do when you get to the office every day? Is there a routine that
Clean
you?
up, clean up. No, I just clean up overnight messages, all of it. Just like get it down to zero ASAP. Boom.
Yeah, get that fresh start from that's
Absolutely. Just
yeah.
clean.
Zero inbox is a tough thing to achieve. I think we're all striving for it, but
Actually, I don't think it's that tough. It's like I go to bed with zero. I wake up with zero pretty quickly. So
yeah. I need to get some tips offline from you on that because that's definitely a struggle for me. But it's great. Yeah, I think we're probably reaching the end of the conversation, but I really want to thank you for taking some time to walk us through your business and how it started and the sort of the insights that informed the launch of it. I think it's really interesting, and so thank you again. Where can our listeners go to find out more about Recorded Future?
so recordedfuture.com. Check it out. You can find everything there. I would, if you sort of are just enticed by it, but obviously not ready to go any further. We have this thing we call Cyber Daily, which is a daily summary of the most compelling things, or sometimes not so compelling, depending on what you have on it. Bad news on cyber side of things. So Cyber Daily. So just go to our website and look for that. It's free. Tens of thousands of people get it every day. Some pretty remarkable people around the world. So it's not a bad place to go. Check it out.
Really good conversation, Christopher. Thanks again. And just one more time, it's recordedfuture.com. And then what's the other, the Cyber Daily?
Cyber Daily.
Yeah.
Just check it out. You'll find it there. Cyber Daily.
Great. Okay. Thanks again, Christopher. We enjoyed the conversation and we'll talk soon.
Very good. Thank you. Have a good day.